you know, because young students, professors, educators, everyone can relate to that, whether it's sport or whether it's using that team as a metaphor.
I was going to ask you, how do you think we can bridge the gap between a lot of the teachers, I'm looking at generation gap, technology gap, economic gap, because from my experience, I noticed a lot of teachers generalize what they went through going to school and feel that all the students today are having the same experience. And they're not culturally sensitive or aware that things have changed. And especially with the dynamic of the family and toxic environment, many of the teachers never experience a toxic environment, such as having a drunk relative living in a home, or what the kids are going through. How can we bridge the gap and continue to educate the teacher to keep in touch with what some of the students are going through so they can relate to them more?
One, school districts have to make it a point. They have to make it a point that it is of the pretty much demand that it is that these teachers need to build these relationships with these kids, because like you said, until there's a relationship there, it always gives the teacher the pass to make excuses because they don't know, right? And so what I venture to say, and I heard Dr. Andrade said before, is that people are naturally empathetic, right? But it's easy to not be empathetic if you don't know that student's story. Because before we even get to changing how they are in the classroom, we have to change how they enter the classroom and what they think about these young people. And that is very difficult to change people's minds who, if you will, have been teaching for years, they're already set in their ways. But if, one, they're willing to build relationships with those students and their families, two, recognize, and I said this earlier, recognize that they're not the only person in the classroom who has knowledge. See, that's one of the issues too, when the teacher feels like, I'm the person in charge, I have all the knowledge and you're supposed to learn from me. Because when it comes to the technology piece, one of the things I thought about was the use of multimedia, right? If you have a relationship with the kids, ask them, hey, well, how do you think I should teach it? Oh, well, we can use music, we can use songs, we can use PowerPoints, we can, talk to the kids because, and I think it needs to come out more in my study, but I say out of the mouths of babes because I believe they can tell us what they need. But there has to be an initiative from the school district that says, listen, you have to build these relationships. This is how we expect you to do it, and at least put it out there. Now, whether or not it will work, right? Because if you have a teacher who's been teaching for 30 years and they've never experienced social inequalities, the reality is that person is set in their ways. You're less likely to change someone from doing that. But that doesn't mean that you don't have a responsibility to try, because all it takes is for one person to get it, and then they start communicating with their colleagues because guess what? They have these relationships with their colleagues, and they'll listen to them. And then you sort of start with one person, and it spreads to the group as a whole. At least that's what I think.
Is there a way you can develop workshops to help? From your dissertation, can you take the information you gathered and you can create workshops for a lot of us?
The intent is to do that. As soon as I finish my dissertation and create those heuristics. But yes.
And these case studies you wrote, I think, would be fantastic training materials for honestly, for sure.
Yeah. So I really want you to work on this, Damien. Okay, I really want you to be able to. That's exactly the kind of question that practitioners are going to ask you. Okay, and you got to be able to have a laser beam answer. Okay, she shouldn't have to spoon feed you back. Should we have some workshops? And you're like, yeah, we should have some workshops. Right? So you really got to, that's the next level for you as you transition out of the writing, okay, to have that pocket full of solutions. And you're going to get the same kind of questions consistently from teachers. The more you do this work, the more you'll see that whether you're in Denver, whether you're in Baltimore, let's say, just by chance, whether you're in, right, New York, or whether you're in, you know, the Bay, it's remarkable how the teachers and schools are struggling with the same things, and they're asking the same set of questions. And the more that you can have that laser beam answer, the more your work will get out there, the more people will want to use it, which is the point of doing the work. The more they'll come to the school you build as a lab school, right, to actually see it. Okay? So really think about the kind of direct, pragmatic answers that you would give. I think that question got video or audio taped, right? Really go back and hear that question and think about what would you say directly to any principal or teacher that asked you that is pragmatic, not a dance around, okay, but that is structural. That this week you could start doing this. Over the course of the semester you could do this. Over the course of the year you could build these structures in which would fundamentally change practice. Okay? What I would add to that is this, that you say, well, you got the 30-year vet, blah, blah, blah. Okay? What's the solution for that? I'm throwing it out there to you. What's the solution? So if there's a 30-year vet, if there's a curmudgeon, okay, worst case scenario teacher situation.
They gotta go.
Okay, well, you already know what a principal's going to say about that. Right?
He's fine.
They're tenured, I can't, I'm locked in with this person.
Give them minimal responsibilities.
Rubber room.
Okay, so if you don't have a compelling answer for that right now,
I don't.
okay, get one. Because I'm telling you right now that that's what they're going to ask you about. Okay? And I'll give you my quick answer to them is what I tell them is stop focusing on that person. Why do you keep focusing on your lowest common denominator? Okay? Build an environment where that teacher sees all around them excellence. Okay? And they'll change or leave. The reason that 30-year vet is still there is because they're too damn comfortable. And you think by sticking a pin up their butt that they're going to get uncomfortable. And they're not. Okay? That you want to develop the talent, or I mean, how do you develop, how can we make the Raiders better, bro?
Right. Put
Right.
talent around them.
Yeah, right? And mediocre folks, right, suddenly rise to a much higher level of performance when they're surrounded by talent. So you got to be able to talk to folks about how to develop a recruiting strategy, right? Literally, what I tell superintendents and principals is you're the GM. Okay? How are you going to build a national championship sports team? Okay? You got to develop the talent you have, and you got to have a massive recruiting strategy to bring in talent. Because if you got mediocre talent right now, best case scenario, you make it to the playoffs. You don't even win no championship. You've got to get LeBron. Okay? And if you don't know where LeBron is, you ain't trying to win no championship. Okay? You got to be hunting out LeBron, and then get in D Wade, and then bring Chris Bosh. Okay? That's how you win championships. You got to have talent. And most principals don't think that way. Most principals don't have a serious recruiting strategy, nor do most superintendents. Okay? And so they take mediocre talent every year, and they're just trying to be.
About 500.
That's the heuristic that they really want to know. Like, so if you're gonna create a final diagram, it's actually gonna be, it's like, the answer is, where do I fit in? And you're answering
Yeah.
that question. Like, so, however this looks, there should be like something where, if I'm an administrator, I can do these things to.
Think about units of change. Okay? What's the heuristic for the individual teacher? How can they develop? How can they change? How can they positively impact hope? Okay? What's the heuristic for the principal? Okay? How can they change? How can they develop? How can they impact hope? Okay? What's the heuristic for the district leader? Okay? Because if you get all three of those engines pumping at a really high level, you can turn a school around, you can turn a district around. Right? But if you only have one of those levels, then it's a lot harder road to hoe. Okay, any final questions from the audience before we go let Coyote decide if you get your PhD. Anybody else?
Yeah,
Yeah.
I think maybe one more thing is, you know, as administrators or principals and teachers, we might see progress with students, but then because of all the trauma in their lives, you might see regression. And so how do you sort of sustain that level of motivation for your staff to keep on working with them, even though you've done, or you feel like you've put in so much, but you're just tired because something happened. And it's like, oh no, you know, and like we learned about that in Jeff's class. So practically, what do we do?
I wonder too, if you had a connection to that student, you would keep probably going. And as a parent, as my children disappoint, they make me happy, disappoint, make me happy. Because I'm connected, I'm gonna keep moving forward with, it's gonna be less likely that I'm gonna put them to the side and, you know, just, I lose hope for that child if I'm connected to them. I think it's less likely that I would lose hope.
But going on with that too is, you know, I'm a teacher and, you know, I teach special ed and so I feel kind of hopeless because I can only do so much in the classroom and they still go home at the end of the day. So everything that I taught them that day, like Jackie mentioned, they regress and they go back. And so I sometimes help them and fuel that hope, but then they come back to school the next day hopeless. So how do you provide that support and encourage the teachers when they themselves feel hopeless?
Especially because in schools you have systems, right? So sometimes you have like, you know, 3 times this, then, you know, you deal with this consequence and such. And there may come a time when you're like really pushing that level and you want to make accommodations. And so how do you help people that work in a system and deal with the rules?
I'm not going to answer this question. But when the heuristic comes out, I will tell you.
Those are the $1 million questions.
Right.
Like, and it's really important that you listen closely to practitioners because we can babble on in this room all the time and everything works in here. But on the ground, it's messy.
Right.
And if you got answers for people in the mess, then people are going to use your work. If all you have is kind of, you know, academic psychobabble, then yours will just be another dissertation gathering dust. And there's a lot of those. Cool. All right. So